Hello, good morning, everyone, and welcome to another exciting edition of Lunch with a Scientist. I'm Leah with Headwater Science Institute, and as you may know, Lunch with a Scientist is another opportunity to meet a brilliant STEM professional. So today, we are about to meet Dr. Nancy Kinner, who has quite a world of experience in her field. So she's a professor of civil and environmental engineering at the University of New Hampshire. She studied initially at Cornell University in biology in 1976, and then went on to get a master's and a PhD in civil engineering from the University of New Hampshire, where she joined the faculty and currently teaches. She has been the UNH Director of Coastal Response Research Center, a partnership between UNH and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration since 2004. And her research explores the role of bacteria and protists in the biodegradation of petroleum compounds and chlorinated solvents. She teaches courses on environmental microbiology, marine pollution and control, fundamentals of environmental engineering, and much more. And we are so honored and excited to be joined by Dr. Nancy Kinner.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks very much, Leah, for having me on. I'm delighted to be here today.
You are so welcome. Through the magic of technology, we're connecting with you from somewhere else. So I know that it's after lunch for you. So happy afternoon. And
thank you.
You're very welcome. I will let you get into your talk without further ado.
Okay. All right. So everyone should be able to see my slides, I hope. And I'm going to talk to you for about a half an hour or so, telling you a little bit about my career in environmental engineering. And telling you how I got there. So it's a great honor today to be talking to you through the Headwaters Institute, which is such a fantastic organization for doing hands-on work. And I really love hands-on work. So I'm going to really talk to you about something that happened in the later part of my career today, which is oil spill research. And I never thought I'd get there, but I did. So I'm going to give you a little background, and then we're going to talk about oil spills in the Arctic and why that's important. But I do a lot of other things. So I'm going to go to the next slide here, I think. How do I advance this, Leah? It's not advancing. I'm obviously doing something incorrect. Let's see. Enter. Whoop. It doesn't seem to be. Let me try this. There we go. Can you see the next slide now? Hopefully. Okay. So this is a picture, obviously, of the world. And can you not see the slides now?
We lost your slides for just a sec there, Nancy.
Okay.
Oh, they're back. And yes, the advancing is working great.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
This is a picture of the world. And this picture of the world was taken when I was a kid. I'm 66 years old now. And it was a picture of the Earth taken from the moon by the astronauts who went up to the moon. And it really put in perspective for me the fact that we lived on the Earth, which was a tiny ball. And remember, this is the first time that people had really seen a picture of the Earth from space. And it just reset my whole view of the world. Now, I grew up in New York State, and I grew up down there on that little red thing, which is called Long Island. And Long Island has shaped kind of like a fish. And you'll notice that it is an island and it's surrounded by water. And I grew up down here on this is called Great South Bay. And I loved being on the water. My dad and mom had a boat that they scraped together money to get. This is not that boat, but it's a similar type of boat. It's called a Chesapeake Bay Bateau. We went out every weekend sailing on it. And it really gave me a huge love of the marine environment that never has left me. And to this day, I'm looking out the window at my house in Maine, and I'm looking out at the water, the marine environment. So when I grew up on Long Island, it turns out that that particular area of Long Island produced at that time most of the hard shell clams that were actually dredged up in the United States. And the guys in my high school class used to go out on boats like this. It's called a garvey. And they would go out and tong using rakes to get clams out of the mud. But it was something that girls didn't do. And so even though I loved being on the water, it was very hard for me to figure out how I could make a living working there. But I was able to take a class when I was in 9th grade, and it was a summer program that I got a scholarship because my parents couldn't pay for it to take. And this program got us to all sorts of beaches and marshes and wonderful places to study. And so I learned a lot about marine biology and about the oceans, and it opened up a world to me that maybe I could make a living working in marine biology. So I went off to college, and that's what I decided I was going to study, was marine biology. And when I was a sophomore, second year of college, my advisor was the director of the Shoals Marine Laboratory. And he said to me, next summer, why don't you come out to the Shoals Marine Laboratory, which is on an island off the coast of Maine, and study marine biology? And I said, oh, that would be awesome. And that's what I did. And in fact, as part of that program for that summer, you could spend 7 weeks on the island studying marine biology. And then we spent 6 weeks on this big 100-foot-long schooner sailing in the North Atlantic looking for whales. And it was great. It was wonderful. I loved it. So I was convinced that marine biology was the way to go. Now, along the way, I decided, oh, I'd really love to go back to that Shoals Marine Lab. Here's a view, a bird's eye view of it. I'd love to go back and spend a summer out there. You can imagine how great that was. So I talked to my advisor. Remember, he's the director of the lab. And I said, I would love to go back out there and do some marine biology studies out on the island. And but I can't afford to go out there all summer without a job. And he said to me, Nancy, I have a job for you. What you can do is you can do tests on the lab's wastewater treatment system, their sewage treatment system. And it was in this little building right here that I've circled. Okay. And so I started to do work on that. And what I realized is I became totally fascinated with that system because it actually provided a solution to a marine pollution problem. And I wanted to save the world. Remember that big world that I looked at when I was a kid? I wanted to save the earth from pollution. And here was a way, doing wastewater treatment using microbes and biology, that I could actually do that. And so I kind of switched gears and decided, wait a second, how could I provide solutions to environmental problems in the marine environment? And it turns out that when I looked into it, it was engineers who did that kind of work. They provided the solutions. They didn't just study the pollution, they provided the solutions. And I love to work with my hands. I love to work with tools, etc., and build things. And so this was a great opportunity. And so something that I really didn't plan on totally changed my view of going from a scientist to an engineer. So how did that happen? Well, it turns out I really like math. I like to do especially algebra problems, to kind of solve for variables. And that's a lot of what engineering is about. And as I said, I love to build things. I love to build and solve problems. And so engineering is all about that kind of thing. Plus, I like to work in the lab and I like to go out in the field. And engineering, environmental engineering, provided me a way to do that. And the last thing was also important. I love to work with people. I don't just like to work in a lab. I like to work with people in communities to help solve their problems. And so engineering, environmental engineering, was a way that I could do that. So, as Leah mentioned, I have a college degree. I went for 4 years to an undergraduate college, and I studied science. Then I switched to engineering. I had to do about a year of makeup courses to study environment, to become an environmental engineering major. So I then did a master's degree. It took me 2 years of schooling to do the master's degree in environmental engineering. And then it took me about 3.5 years to get a PhD. So I was able to do research and teach environmental engineering. So what do I do? Well, here's what I do. About 40% of my week is spent teaching college-level environmental engineering students in their classes. So I'm either teaching the class, I'm preparing the lectures, I'm working with the students in help sessions, all that kind of thing, and sometimes working with them in the lab, etc. About 10% of my week is advising my students for what classes they should take, that kind of thing. This is very similar to what a high school guidance counselor does, but for college students. About 45% of my week is doing research, and I'm going to talk to you about what some of that is. And then about 5% of my week is spent doing service on state and national committees. So that's what I do in a given week. And I work a lot of hours, but by choice. I get up every morning pretty much, and I am ready and raring to go, and I love what I do. Now I'm going to tell you something, a little story about that, because my dad was a maintenance foreman. He worked in a big manufacturing plant, and his job was to make sure that all the machinery worked properly and the lights all were on, and the snow was plowed in the parking lots, etc. And he didn't go to college. He didn't get a college degree. And he and my mom didn't get a college degree either. And they both said to us, it's so important for you to get an education. And the same with my sister and brother. And they said one other thing. My dad said, I've never really liked what I've done for a job, and I have to do it a lot. It's the thing I do more than almost anything else but sleeping. And to not like your job makes your life pretty awful. So he said, whatever you do, make sure you do something that you love. And both my brother and my sister and I all have done jobs that we love. We like to get up in the morning and do our jobs. So that's really important, and I love what I do. If I had to do it all over again, I'd do the same thing. So what do I do research on? Well, Leah mentioned work that I did several years ago on groundwater pollution. But I got involved since about the year 2000 in looking at disaster response. And that's to oil spills. And you see this picture up here where there's a big fire. That spill occurred about 10 years ago. It was called the Deepwater Horizon spill in the Gulf of Mexico. It was the largest spill ever in the U.S. 11 people died when that accident happened, and the oil poured out of the well for 86 days uncontrolled. So that was a big, big spill, and that was a defining moment in my career. We worked very hard on that spill and trying to figure out whether one particular solution called dispersants was a good solution. I also work a lot on hurricanes because hurricanes are just coastal disasters, and they also cause spills and cause, obviously, public health issues and safety issues for people. So I work on those as well. And most of my work is back there in the marine and coastal environment that I love so much. So who do I work with on my research? Well, I have a center called the Coastal Response Research Center, which is run out of the University of New Hampshire, and it was started in 2004. And it is funded by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA. Okay? And that NOAA is a big agency in the US federal government, and it does marine science. It does a lot of marine science work, hence the word oceanic. They also study satellites and the atmosphere and winds and hurricanes and things of that nature. There's a particular group inside of NOAA that I work with. It's called the Office of Response and Restoration, or OR&R. And we've been partnering with them since 2004 with this center, trying to help them because they are the lead agency to provide scientific support. So they provide the science when there's an oil spill or a disaster in the marine environment. They provide scientific advice, basically, to the U.S. Coast Guard. So I work with them, with the center, and the people, my colleagues in the center and my students, to try and help them come up with creative solutions to deal with these kinds of environmental disasters. So here's what we do in the center. We conduct research and we oversee research. So right now I have students working on sunken oil and how to figure out where it's going to move. And I have students who are working on marine snow and oil getting attached to it. And then we also oversee projects. Right now we're overseeing a project for NOAA where we are having all sorts of vendors or people who have technologies that can measure oil thickness on the water. We're having them come to a site in New Jersey where we can test their technologies on known thicknesses of oil to see how good those technologies are. So we either conduct or oversee that research. And most of that research is very applied research that's got to come up with specific solutions to distinct problems. Okay? The other thing that we do is we transform that research into practice. We try to make sure that what we do can be used by the responders in the field. We also serve as a hub nationwide and internationally for oil spill research and development to make sure that what's happening is not everybody focusing on one topic, but to make sure all topics are covered so we can come up with solutions. And I do a lot of facilitation of the interaction between people in the oil spill community. Because as you can imagine, they don't all agree with each other as to how to have solutions. The people from industry, the oil industry, don't always agree with the people who are in non-governmental organizations, and they can get kind of not so happy with each other. And my job is to help them work together, to facilitate that. I never thought I'd be doing that, but I just got off a phone call, in fact, a Zoom call a few minutes ago, right before this, where people were arguing about what type of measurements should we take during an oil spill. What are the ones that are really needed? Because remember, it costs a lot of money to take those measurements. So what ones do we really need to have in our database so that if a spill occurs on a particular oil, we know how to react? And people had very different views on that. And so I was trying to say, well, what do you think? And what do you think? Well, could we find compromise here? So that's a lot of what I do now. And then I educate and train students who are going to pursue careers in spill response and restoration. So where do I work? Well, I work in almost all the U.S. coastal states, including the Great Lakes. And I've been to Alaska many, many times and to Hawaii. So pretty much all over the U.S. In Puerto Rico, for example, the Commonwealth, territory of Puerto Rico. I've also been around the world. I've been in Europe, in several countries like England, France, Germany, and Denmark. I've been in Scandinavia multiple times, to Norway and Sweden, and I've been to Russia twice and to China. So all of those countries have problems with oil spills, and so that's what I do when I go over there. So I've had a lot of travel. Until COVID came along, I was traveling at least once a month, sometimes twice. And I work with a great team of people. So these are some of my students. This person here, I'm hoping you can see my arrow, is Kathy Monsager. She and I have worked together for 15 years, and she's the coordinator of the program. And then I've got undergraduate students. They're working here with someone from NOAA. And there's another undergrad. And I've got grad students. This is Quinn and Megan. And you can see we even have lots of fun together. And my students have traveled all over with me, so I take them with me. So I'm going to use the last 10 minutes or so to talk about a specific area where we're doing a lot of work, and that's the Arctic, okay? And we're doing a lot of oil spill work there. So if we look down from the top of the world to the Arctic, you can see that there's the Arctic Ocean. And what you notice from this picture is that the US has one country, one state that borders on the Arctic, and that's Alaska, obviously. And then Canada has lots of land that is in the Arctic, Greenland. But look at what the biggest country is, Russia. And that's why I've gone to Russia twice, and I'm working a lot with Russia, because we have to work with them, because they have the biggest amount of land and activity in the Arctic. Okay? So what you probably already know is that the amount of ice in the Arctic is really decreasing. This figure just shows you from October of 1979 all the way through to 2019, and you can see a downward trend over time in the extent in millions of square kilometers of sea ice up there in the Arctic. Just goes down and down and down and down. And that trend is continuing with climate change. Now, why is that important? Well, it turns out when you look at the Arctic, you can see that there are two potential routes for transport across the Arctic. One is this Northwest Passage here, which goes through kind of the Canadian islands. And the other one is the Northern Sea route, which goes along Russia. Okay? Now, it turns out that of those two routes, the Northern Sea route is the most heavily used right now because it has the most open water. Here in the Northwest Passage, it's a lot more difficult. There's a lot more ice in that area than over here on the Northern Sea route. So this is a map of Russia. Okay, so now we're looking at Russia. This is Norway over here, and Sweden and Finland in this area, okay? And this is all Russia. To give you an idea of how big Russia is, it covers 11 time zones. So the US from the East Coast to the West Coast is 3 time zones. If we add on Alaska, that's 4 time zones. If we add on Hawaii, that's 6 time zones. Russia is so big, it has 11 time zones. It takes over 12 hours to fly from Moscow, which is over here, all the way over here to Vladivostok. Okay, so that takes 12 hours by a jet. So what we're looking at here for Russia is these colors basically indicate just different companies that have oil and gas leases in the Arctic. Russia, its whole economy is built around taking natural resources out of the earth and selling them. That's what Russia's economy is built on. And Russia has developed a lot of oil and gas, and they continue to do so. So the orange here is areas for one gas company. The red is another. The green is a company called Rosneft that does oil leases. So you can see here's the Arctic, and they have a lot of development of oil in the Arctic. Okay? So now we're looking again from the top of the earth down, and notice these red pink tracks. Here's the North Pole, here's Alaska, here's Canada, and here is Russia, okay, over here. All right, that's all Russia. And notice these are all tanker traffic. That's all oil tankers. And Russia takes a lot of its oil right now over to Europe by a tanker. And you'll notice that there are more pink lines coming this way now. And what is Russia doing? Well, they're sending their oil now to China, which is right down here. Some of their biggest countries now in the Orient, in the Asia that are taking their oil are China, Japan, and South Korea, but predominantly China. In fact, China is helping them to develop this area for oil. So that might not seem like it has any impact on the U.S., but let's move over here. Here's Alaska, here's the Arctic, here's Russia. And it turns out that Alaska and Russia, right here by the Diomedes Islands, is only 56 miles across from one to the other. That's only about 56 miles, okay? So it's not very far to these islands out here, okay? So this is called the Bering Strait right through here. And it turns out that there's a negotiated boundary. It was negotiated originally in the late 1860s between the U.S. and Russia, which was called Soviet Union during this picture. So this is the international boundary that was negotiated when the U.S. bought Alaska from Russia back in the 1860s. So there you are, okay? So the U.S. is very much impacted by tanker traffic coming down through the Bering Strait. So let's look here at what happens for traffic in the Bering Strait. So there's January, February, March, April, and then you can see all of a sudden these ship tracks, these gray ship tracks start to go up. Why? Because in January, February, March, April, there's ice, okay? The ice is just starting to build up in December. And then the waters are pretty ice-free in June through October into November. And look at all that traffic again on the Russian side. And that traffic is only going to get bigger as the Russians sell more and more oil to China. Now, you might say, well, they can't go there in the winter, so don't worry. But they have built nuclear icebreakers. And in fact, when you want to look at this presentation, I'm not going to do it now because of time, but I've embedded a little video in here that you can click on, and you can see how these icebreakers work. They can go out for 6 months or more, and they can crash through meters of ice. So you can see here the ice just gets crushed. It just, the ship rides up on the ice. I've seen this happen, and it just crashes down. It can go through 6 meters of ice and open up so that the waters of the northern sea route can have tankers that can go year-round to China. So why am I concerned about that? Well, if you look at the Bering Sea, at this whole area here, we have huge natural resources. Crabs, just shown here. These are just 2 crabs. There are all sorts of fish, etc. And if there was an oil spill, we know these organisms would be terribly, terribly impacted. They're already stressed because of climate change and what stuff that's changing in the waters, but now they would be stressed by an oil spill. And oil goes into the water, it floats on the water, it sinks into the sediments, so it can be very, very dangerous. And these, you can look at this later, are just some of the ways that oil can impact fish, contaminating their gills, etc. They can ingest it, that it can affect whales, seals, and walruses, and sea otters, and birds. So this is a really, really bad thing when an oil spill occurs. Just to give you an idea, now remember, this here, this distance that I'm showing you here from over here at this point over to here, where this is Alaska and this is the Bering Strait here, that's about 8 time zones. So it's a big distance. And these little areas where you see a blue dot, they are where there are oil spill response resources. So think about them having one place on the Bering, on this Bering Sea, Bering Strait, that has oil spill response equipment. And then there's one way over here, which is about 3 time zones away. So that would be like flying from California to over to here to get your response equipment to clean up the oil. Not good. If you look at the US side, okay, we have a little bit more response equipment, but this again is a huge area, okay, to cover. And those storms can be really big. So what we're doing right now is working on modeling for oil spill response. We are working on ways to have common operating pictures, and we're trying to work so that we can facilitate the US working with the Russians, because if a spill occurs in this region, both countries have to respond. We don't have enough resources for just one country to respond. So that kind of gives you an idea of the things that I work on. And I've talked now for about 30 minutes. So I think we should probably open this up for questions. I do want to note that we have a great website that you can click on. That's that crrc.unh.edu to tell you all about the kinds of work we do. And I've also included my email if you want to email me with questions or to talk. Okay, so I think that's good, Leah. We can do some questions now if people want to.
That's great. Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you.
I do have a couple questions to kick us off here. Just going back to starting off with sort of your career path, you could have chosen to be a researcher full-time, and you said that you like working with people. Can you explain a little bit more about how continuing to be a teacher might complement your professional career in research?
Oh, absolutely, I can. Yeah. So when you teach something, you have to know it really well. And so, you know, it isn't just you study it once and then you close the book and go on. So you have to really know it well. And sometimes when you know stuff really well, it helps you to be able to put things together into a bigger picture. So that's one reason. The second reason is that I find a lot of times when I'm teaching something, all of a sudden a little light goes off and I think about something in my research that I didn't know how to answer. So I'll give you an example of that. I was teaching one day a course, and I was talking about how you actually can separate big molecules from little ones. And you can use a filter, okay? And at that time, we were doing a project where we needed to separate big microbes from little ones. And in the middle of the lecture, a student asked me a question, which didn't relate to that, but related to this question about separating big and little. And all of a sudden, a light went off, and I thought, oh my goodness, we could use this same principle to solve our research question. So I think it's fun. Plus, I love working with students. They keep you excited, and they're always asking great questions.
Right. So they kind of inform each other.
And they inform me, right?
Yeah. Interesting. So let's get into some of the actual work. So with this increasing traffic on the Bering Strait or in the Bering Sea, what is sort of the general common goal? Are we trying to reduce the incidence of oil spills, or are we predicting that they're going to happen and increase the response areas? Where is the work there?
Okay, so the work, as with any problem, is multifaceted, okay, the solutions. So there's something called the Arctic Council, which is all the Arctic nations plus some others that work on solutions. And so one of the things that the Arctic Council has done is they've made some decisions about the kinds of ships that can go through the Arctic. And they've said ships need to be have multiple hulls. So instead of just having one skin, they have to one outer layer, they have to have multiple outer layers so that if they hit an ice piece or something, that helps. So there's cooperation on things like that, kind of structural things, I'll call them. Then there's discussion of how to cooperate, because if an oil spill occurs in the Arctic, we definitely want to have the Russians working with the US, with Canada, all of the Arctic nations helping out, because it's such a hard place to work. It's dark for half the year. It's very dark up there. And the storms are really bad. And as we mentioned, the resources are far apart. So they are pooling together and planning and practicing how they would respond. Okay? So there are things like prevention. There are things like preparedness, planning of how they'd respond. And then there are the response technologies. One of the things we've been working on is thinking about modeling. And modeling is where you use equations to predict where the oil might go. Okay? Because when oil hits water, it spreads. All right? And even if it's under the ice, it may spread. The ice sea ice is very convoluted underneath there. It looks like going into a cave with spikes and things coming down of ice. And we need to understand, is that oil going to just stick up in the pockets of the ice, or is it going to actually move because there are currents under that ice? So we use models to predict that. And we use some very specialized technology. So some of the projects we're working on and overseeing are looking at that technology. Some of them are trying to model to predict where that oil might go so that responders actually know where to go. So I don't know if that helped you. The other thing that's happening is research. We're working on a project right now, overseeing it, just starting with NOAA, to think about if a whale comes up and just goes and blows out its contaminated, its air after it's been down. If it blows through oil and then it takes, what's the next thing it does? It takes a big, deep breath. It now sucks those oil droplets in and they get into its lungs. We found that out in Deepwater Horizon. So how bad is that? And how are we going to deal with that? Okay. So that just gives you an idea of some of the range of problems for projects that we're overseeing and some of the cooperation that goes on.
Right. A lot to think about. So we've got a question from Spencer here, who you may know. It's dear friend.
I know Spencer.
Okay, so that it relates directly to what you were just talking about. So can you talk more about how do you prepare for an international cleanup, both scientifically, which you touched on a little bit, and politically?
Yeah. Okay. So scientifically is the easy part, Spencer, because scientists usually like to work together, as do engineers, right? So, for example, we're working on a project now trying to think about how would we get scientists from different countries, Canada, actually this project on modeling. We have Canadian modeling scientists, US ones, Russian ones, Norwegian ones, all working together, okay? Scientists trying to figure out what's the best way to solve these problems. The problem is politically, okay? Because politics is where people, they get kind of in positions and they say, well, we don't want to work with that country because they're not doing something, or they're doing something we don't like. One good thing in the Arctic is this Arctic Council, which is a fascinating organization. It's it's like the UN, like the United Nations, but for just the Arctic. And there are many fewer nations involved, and they realize how important it is to work together, okay? And that's because it's difficult in the Arctic. You need everybody to help out in the Arctic, okay? So if there's a spill, we have to band together because you aren't that far from me, and if you spill oil, my fish might be contaminated, okay? Or the oil might get encapsulated, stuck in the ice, and that ice might drift from the US to Canada, okay? Or from Norway to Iceland. And now it's somebody else's problem. So politically, there is a little bit more will to work together in the Arctic and in the Arctic Council. The problem is that in a big country like the US and Russia, there are other things that we're not in agreement on. And so oil spills, sometimes everybody says, no, we're still not going to work with them on that. And that's where it gets a little difficult. I don't know if that answered the question for you, but gave you some flavor.
Absolutely. It sounds like there's a lot of different interests working together and really trying to create a solution. I thought it was fascinating when you said that the ice can drift. I hadn't thought that an oil spill can really impact a different country fairly far from where it originated.
Yes, I'll tell you, there was a barge that came loose in the Canadian Arctic. It was being towed, and it was in the fall, and the ice started to come in, because a lot of the Arctic ice is 1 year ice. It grows in the fall and then it melts out, like in those pictures I showed. Well, this barge ended up drifting from Canada into US waters and then into Russian waters over the course of the winter. So it can really go far.
Wow. So in the unlikely event of an actual oil spill, what does the practice of an oil spill cleanup look like?
So do you mean the drill, or do you mean what happens during an oil spill, do you think?
I think, yeah, what happens during an oil spill, what's the immediate response to that by scientists?
Okay, so here's how it works. So and I'm just going to talk about the US way, because that's probably the easiest to talk about right now. It's a little bit different from country to country, but the US has probably the best system, because we have a very long history of working on this since the Exxon Valdez. So an oil spill occurs. Let's just say it's a ship accident, okay? So the ship captain calls into the Coast Guard and says, we are leaking oil, okay, from our ship, whatever. And then the Coast Guard immediately activates a call and says, we have an oil spill. There's a response that has to be started, okay? The Coast Guard is the lead organization in a maritime oil spill, all right? So they actually, the Coast Guard captain, who's for that particular area of the ocean or district coast, becomes what's called the Federal On-Scene Coordinator. That individual, that captain, basically is in charge of figuring out how we're going to respond, okay? So there's something called a unified command, which is the Coast Guard person. It's the owner of the ship. It might be the company that has the product in there, the oil in there. It's the NOAA. It's states, if it's in state waters or might impact state waters. And they're all sitting there in this command post. And a command post might have 300 people in it. It's huge. There are some people who are thinking about, and it gets set up because they've practiced it a lot. It has people who are thinking about logistics. Where are we going to get food to feed the responders? Where are we going to get the material to skim up the oil that's on the surface? Some people in the Coast Guard are just thinking, how are we going to get out there to save those people on the ship and to stabilize the ship? People from NOAA are thinking about, oh my goodness, what birds might be impacted? What fish might be impacted? That kind of thing. And then there are people who are just thinking about how to clean up the oil. What's the best way to do that? And they are in the, they're really thinking about, how do we get booms or skimmers to corral the oil out there to the ship? So all of these people are working together. And some people are just thinking about, how are we going to fund all of this? How are we going to pay for all of it? Because, you need to pay for all of it. Nobody's going to let you have this for free. So all of this has to work together and be a smooth machine. And that's why our laws require that we practice or exercise these responses, so that if a real event occurs, we know how to respond and how to work together.
Wow, that's a huge mobilization of efforts with a pretty big impact. So I think that it's really key that we talk about these things so that when they happen, we have some understanding of what's going on.
Yep.
So Nancy, we're going to wrap up soon here, but I wanted to ask you, kind of going back to your whole career, a last question. You talked pretty beautifully about your journey into science and then how you decided to actually become an engineer and not a marine biologist. And I think that that's a tough decision for some people. So for the students watching, how did you really figure out how to tailor your science career to something that really interests you?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is that you can make a decision and pursue a certain career, and you can change, right? Most of the time, we're not stuck. If you've got a good education behind you, you're not stuck in one place, okay? Just like me, I studied marine biology, but I could switch and I could change. And I had colleagues and professors who could rely on, who I knew from my college, that would say, hey, we can help you make those decisions. So you need good mentors, okay? But you can change. And I would say that for me, I loved marine biology. Don't get me wrong, I loved it. But when I got to do that hands-on project at the Shoals Marine Lab, where I could be tinkering and trying to figure out what flow to use for the flow through the system and how fast to turn the discs that were part of the system, it just like clicked for me. It was like, wow, I am working on a solution that's going to help this problem. And for me, that's what really excited me. I think right? It's like falling in love. When you've fallen in love with somebody, right? And you just think, wow, this is the most special thing. And I fell in love with the environmental engineering part of it, okay? Not that I didn't like marine biology, I love it. But the love was for the hands-on solutions. And of course, you can change. Sometimes you fall out of love and then you maybe find some other field. But for me, that's how it worked. I don't know if that answered your question, Leah.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's beautiful advice for a student, just really going through the journey of life, but also the journey of selecting a career and an educational path. It's great.
Yeah. Okay.
Spoken by a true woman with lots of experience. Thank you so much, Nancy Kinner. I'm going to put you in the backstage real quick and just give a couple last announcements for our audience.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
And if anyone wants to contact me, the info's on the slides. Thank you. Thanks very much for listening. And I hope you have a good day. And I hope that 2021 is a good year for you. Take care. Thanks to Headwaters. Bye-bye.
So we want to thank Nancy Kinner so much. She did another excellent talk for our Lunch with the Scientist series today. I just wanted to quickly remind you that it is giving season. If you are able, we would really appreciate your help funding our Lunch with the Scientist talks, which are provided to students absolutely free, and we want to keep them that way in 2021. So you can head to our website, headwatersscienceinstitute.org/donate. The last thing to say is if you are a student or a parent watching and you're excited by this kind of hands-on research, we are offering the Headwaters Research Experience starting February 2nd. It's an opportunity for students to work directly one-on-one with scientist mentors through a digital cohort, and then they go outside and perform research that they have created all on their own to see through an original research project, author a research paper that they get published, and come up with a professional quality research presentation. So you can visit our website to find out more information about the Headwaters Research Experience if you're interested. Thank you so much for watching and have a great day.